June 23, 1944. Mid-Atlantic, 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Commander Kameo Uno stood in the conning tower of I-52, watching darkness settle over the heaving ocean. After 14 weeks at sea, his massive cargo submarine had just completed a critical rendezvous with German U-530, taking aboard 2 radar technicians and their equipment, precious technology that might help his crew survive the dangerous transit to occupied France. What Uno couldn't know, what no Japanese submarine commander truly understood yet, was that he and his 108 crewmen were already dead. Miles above them in the moonless sky, an Avenger torpedo bomber from USS Bogue had them locked on radar. The American pilot could see what the Japanese could not detect: invisible electromagnetic waves painting I-52's position with crystalline precision. Within minutes, the submarine would become the perfect demonstration of American technological superiority in the invisible war being waged through the electromagnetic spectrum. The acoustic torpedo that ended I-52 moments later, homing on the submarine's propeller noise through sonobuoys the Japanese didn't know existed, represented something far more terrifying than simple weapons. It symbolized the complete integration of radar detection, sonar tracking, signals intelligence, and precision weapons into a coordinated system that transformed the Pacific Ocean from a vast hiding place into a transparent killing ground where Japanese submarines had nowhere left to hide. This is the story of how American radar and sonar technology created an invisible net that Japanese submarine crews learned to fear more than depth charges, more than aircraft, more than any visible threat. It's the account of technological superiority so complete that survival became impossible, of electromagnetic dominance that rendered Japanese submarine doctrine obsolete, and of how innovation in detection systems proved more decisive than any advantage in submarine design or crew courage. The revolution began quietly in American research laboratories, while Japanese submarine designers focused on building the largest, fastest, most heavily armed underwater vessels in the world. Imperial Japan entered World War II with arguably the most impressive submarine fleet ever assembled. They had built technological marvels, submarines over 400 feet long that could cruise 20,000 miles without refueling, boats carrying floatplane bombers, vessels achieving underwater speeds exceeding 19 knots through revolutionary hull designs and powerful battery systems. These submarines employed the finest torpedoes in the world, Type 95 weapons using pure oxygen to burn kerosene, giving them 3 times the range of American torpedoes with reduced wakes that made them nearly impossible to spot. Their warheads packed 1,210 pounds of high explosive, larger than anything the Allies possessed. Japanese submarine crews trained rigorously in the warrior traditions of Bushido, prepared to die for the emperor with the same dedication that drove kamikaze pilots. But for all their impressive capabilities, Japanese submarines lacked something the Imperial Japanese Navy didn't initially value: sophisticated electronics for detection and evasion. While American engineers poured resources into radar and sonar development, Japanese naval doctrine assumed submarines would operate as fleet scouts, relying on stealth, speed, and crew skill rather than electronic systems. This philosophical divide would prove catastrophic. The first American submarine radar, designated SD, became operational in 1941. A primitive system by later standards, it could detect aircraft at approximately 12 miles range, giving submarines crucial warning to dive before enemy planes could attack. The system operated on 114 MHz frequency with a periscope-mounted antenna, providing early warning without directional information. For American submariners operating in Pacific waters, where Japanese anti-submarine aviation remained limited, this simple radar transformed operational capabilities. But the real revolution came in mid-1942 with deployment of the SJ surface search radar. Operating in the S-band at 10 centimeters wavelength, the SJ represented quantum leap beyond the SD system. This directional radar could detect ships at 15 to 20 miles depending on sea conditions and antenna height, providing both range and bearing information. By early 1943, every American submarine carried SJ radar, creating comprehensive surface detection capabilities that Japanese forces couldn't match or counter. The SJ radar's impact on submarine warfare cannot be overstated. American submarines could now hunt on the surface at night with near impunity, using their diesel engines for maximum speed and battery charging, while radar swept the horizon for targets. When contacts appeared on the plan position indicator scope, submarine commanders could maneuver into optimal attack positions while maintaining detection. The radar even enabled communication between submarines and wolf packs through carefully timed pulse transmissions, creating coordinated tactics impossible with visual signals alone. Japanese submarines operating in the same waters possess no equivalent capability. Research into radar technology didn't begin in Japan until 1941, years behind American and British development. By 1944, when surface search radars finally appeared on Japanese escort vessels, the systems could detect targets at only 10 miles range and were so primitive that using them at night revealed the ship's position to American radar detection equipment. Japanese submarine radar remained nearly non-existent until June 1944, when the first sets were installed, by which time the technological gap had become insurmountable. Lieutenant Hideo Tanaka, commanding RO-106, experienced this disparity firsthand on May 22, 1944. His submarine was part of a 7-boat picket line, positioned to intercept American carrier task forces north of the Admiralty Islands. Japanese naval intelligence had decoded American movement patterns and positioned submarines across routes Admiral Halsey had used twice before. The plan was tactically sound, the execution professionally managed, and the submarine crews among Japan's best. None of it mattered. At 0351 hours, RO-106 surfaced to recharge batteries and ventilate the boat, standard procedure for submarines of that era. Tanaka's E-27 radar detector, recently installed and temperamental at best, failed to warn him that USS George's radar had painted his submarine at 8 miles range. When George's searchlight suddenly illuminated RO-106, Tanaka ordered an emergency dive. The submarine managed to submerge, but American destroyer escorts England, George, and Rabi now held precise position data. What followed demonstrated the lethal effectiveness of American anti-submarine systems working in coordination. The American ships didn't rely solely on radar. Once RO-106 submerged, sonar operators aboard all 3 destroyer escorts actively pinged the submarine, tracking its desperate evasive maneuvers with QSL-1 sonar systems that could detect submarines at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards under favorable conditions. These sonars sent high-intensity sound pulses through the water, receiving echoes that revealed target range, bearing, and movement with accuracy Japanese hydrophones couldn't approach. Japanese submarines did possess sonar equipment, echo ranging systems roughly equivalent to American QC sonar from 1937. But the technology gap manifested in multiple dimensions. Japanese sonar emphasized passive listening over active echo ranging, requiring ships to slow or stop for effective use. The equipment occupied excessive space in already cramped hulls, and doctrine called for conservative employment that prioritized concealment over aggressive detection. Most critically, Japanese submarines couldn't simultaneously evade and effectively use their sonar, while American destroyer escorts maintained continuous tracking throughout attacks. USS England gained sonar contact on RO-106 at 4:25 hours. The American ship's first Hedgehog attack missed, but the submarine made a fatal tactical error, possibly attempting to torpedo the destroyer escort. Japanese submarine commanders didn't fully understand the Hedgehog system, a British-designed forward-throwing mortar that launched 24 contact-fused projectiles in a circular pattern up to 270 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike conventional depth charges that exploded at preset depths and disrupted sonar contact, Hedgehogs only detonated on direct impact with a submarine's hull. This meant attacking ships maintained continuous sonar tracking throughout the entire attack run, adjusting aim based on real-time target data. For submarines accustomed to evading blind depth charge patterns, the Hedgehog represented a nightmare weapon that eliminated the traditional escape window between detection and attack. England's second Hedgehog salvo scored at least 3 direct hits on RO-106's pressure hull at 05:01 hours. The submarine and all 49 crew perished instantly. This pattern would repeat across the Pacific as American anti-submarine forces demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of integrated radar sonar weapon systems against Japanese submarines that lacked adequate detection equipment or effective countermeasures. The next day, May 23rd, USS Rabi detected RO-104 on radar at 06:04 hours. The submarine's radar detector functioned properly this time, allowing Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi to dive before the American searchlight could illuminate his boat. But radar detection was only the beginning. Rabi immediately attacked with Hedgehog, forcing RO-104 into radical evasive maneuvers. The Japanese commander even attempted electronic countermeasures, transmitting bursts of tuned sound pulses designed to jam American sonar. These desperate tactics achieved nothing. The American ship simply passed the contact to USS England, whose sonar operators maintained tracking, despite RO-104's evasions. When England's Hedgehog struck home at 08:34 hours, witnesses observed debris and a massive oil slick spreading across miles of ocean. RO-104's entire crew of 58 men died without ever seeing their attackers, killed by technology they couldn't detect and couldn't counter. The massacre continued with brutal efficiency. RO-116 fell to England on May 24th, detected on radar at 01:20 hours, tracked by sonar, and destroyed by Hedgehogs at 02:14 hours. RO-118 followed on May 26th, RO-105 on May 31st, after a desperate 25-hour evasion attempt that exhausted crew and equipment. In 12 days, USS England alone sank 6 Japanese submarines from a single picket line, a feat unmatched in anti-submarine warfare history. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest King's response captured the significance. There will always be an England in the United States Navy, but the victory belonged less to one ship than to the integrated system of electronic detection, tracking, and precision weapons that made Japanese submarine operations suicidal. The technological disparity extended far beyond simple detection ranges. American submarines operating against Japanese shipping enjoyed advantages Japanese submariners couldn't replicate. The SJ radar enabled night surface attacks that transformed submarine tactics. Commanders like Mush Morton of USS Wahoo pioneered aggressive surface approaches, using radar to close on targets while remaining invisible to Japanese lookouts scanning darkness with binoculars. American submarines could detect convoy escorts at ranges where Japanese ships had no awareness of submarine presence. This allowed precise positioning for torpedo attacks, with submarine commanders watching the entire tactical situation develop on planned position indicator displays, while calling ranges and bearings to fire. Control computers. The torpedo data computer, an electromechanical marvel that calculated firing solutions in real time, integrated seamlessly with radar data to enable attacks of unprecedented precision. Japanese anti-submarine forces faced American submarines equipped with technology they couldn't match. When Japanese escort ships finally received surface search radar in September 1944, the systems proved inadequate. Operating on primitive designs with limited range and poor discrimination, these radars often created more problems than they solved. American submarines carried radar detection receivers that identified Japanese radar emissions long before those radars could detect submarines, allowing American boats to simply dive and evade. The acoustic dimension of anti-submarine warfare proved equally decisive. While both sides employed sonar, American systems integrated more completely with weapons and fire control. The chemical recorder, a rotating drum device connected to sonar that displayed range rate and predicted submarine movement, revolutionized anti-submarine tactics. British and American forces developed the creeping attack, where one ship maintained sonar contact while guiding a second ship to attack position with its own sonar silent, creating scenarios submarines found nearly impossible to evade. Japanese anti-submarine forces possessed capable sonar equipment, hydrophones that could detect American submarines at 2,000 meters range when listening ships remained stopped or proceeded at very slow speeds. Their echo-ranging equipment while mediocre by American standards, could locate submerged submarines under favorable conditions. Japanese scientists understood acoustic propagation, temperature gradients, and density layers that affected sonar performance. But understanding theory didn't translate into operational effectiveness. Japanese depth charges, the primary anti-submarine weapon, suffered from systematic deficiencies that American submarines exploited ruthlessly. Most critically, Japanese forces repeatedly set depth charge pistols too shallow, a failing that persisted into 1943. American fleet submarines routinely operated at 300 feet depth, far below the detonation depth of most Japanese depth charges during early war years. Even when Japanese forces correctly estimated submarine depth, their weapons proved less effective than American equivalents. Japanese depth charges carried insufficient explosive and detonated too far from targets to inflict catastrophic damage. American submarines reported numerous instances of depth charge patterns exploding directly overhead without causing serious harm, damage that would have destroyed thinner-hulled Japanese or German submarines. The persistence problem plagued Japanese anti-submarine operations throughout the war. After making contact with American submarines, Japanese escort commanders frequently accepted the slightest evidence of destruction and departed. Oil slicks, debris, or a few moments of silence convinced them the submarine had been sunk, allowing damaged but survivable American boats to escape. This optimistic assessment of damage contrasted sharply with Allied persistence, where anti-submarine forces maintained attacks for hours until absolutely certain of kills. American anti-submarine aviation introduced yet another layer to the detection net that terrified Japanese submariners. By 1943, carrier-based aircraft carried radar capable of detecting surfaced submarines at 12 miles range. More importantly, they deployed sonobuoys, acoustic sensors dropped from aircraft that transmitted submarine sounds to receivers aboard the aircraft. This capability allowed planes to track submerged submarines, maintaining contact until surface ships arrived, or launching acoustic homing torpedoes. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo, codenamed Fido and deceptively classified as a mine for security, represented revolutionary capability. Developed by the Harvard Underwater Sound Laboratory, Fido employed passive sonar to home on submarine propeller noise. Once launched by aircraft, the torpedo would descend to preset depth, activate its acoustic seeker, and home on the loudest noise source in its detection radius. Japanese submarine commanders had no effective countermeasure against acoustic torpedoes. The weapons appeared without warning, tracking propeller cavitation noise that submarines couldn't eliminate without stopping entirely. Stopping meant death from conventional depth charges or follow-up torpedo attacks. Japanese submarines lacked noisemakers or acoustic decoys that might have fooled Fido's seeker head. They possessed no tactical doctrine for evasion because they didn't know such weapons existed until after war's end. The sinking of I-52 in June 1944 demonstrated the complete integration of American anti-submarine capabilities. Naval intelligence intercepted and decoded I-52's radio transmissions, tracking the submarine's route across the Indian Ocean and into the Atlantic. When I-52 rendezvoused with U-530 to receive radar equipment that might have improved survival chances, American forces already had hunter-killer group USS Bogue positioned to intercept. Aircraft from Bogue used radar to detect I-52 on the surface at night, conditions where visual detection was impossible. When the submarine dived, aircraft dropped sonobuoys that tracked propeller noise. 2 acoustic torpedoes followed, the first striking I-52's hull with sufficient force to lift Bogue aircraft tail sections despite separation distance. The submarine imploded at extreme depth, taking all 109 crew, 14 passengers, 298 tons of strategic materials, and 2 tons of gold to the ocean floor, 17,000 feet below. This methodical destruction represented more than tactical victory. It demonstrated American capability to integrate signals, intelligence, radar detection, acoustic tracking, and precision weapons into coordinated operations. Japanese forces couldn't prevent or counter. Every element of the system Japanese submarines lacked worked in lethal synchronization against them. The psychological impact on Japanese submarine crews proved devastating. Unlike surface forces that could see and engage their enemies, submariners faced invisible threats that struck without warning. American radar detected submarines before Japanese lookouts could spot aircraft or ships. American sonar tracked evasive maneuvers through darkness and depth. American weapons struck from directions submarines didn't know were threatened. Morale within the Japanese submarine force collapsed as losses mounted. Surviving officers reported to superior commands that continued operations against American anti-submarine defenses had become suicidal. Crews volunteered for supply missions to isolated garrisons despite knowing such missions meant slow suffocation in damaged boats or destruction by overwhelming enemy forces, because at least supply runs didn't involve hunting American ships protected by radar-equipped escorts and aircraft. The statistics tell the story of technological dominance. Japan began the war with 63 ocean-going submarines and completed 111 more during the conflict, totaling 174 boats. Of these, 128 submarines were lost, representing 3/4 of the force, casualty rates comparable to German U-boat losses but achieved against enemies with vastly superior detection technology. Of the 30 Japanese submarines that supported the Pearl Harbor attack, 0 survived the war. American submarines, operating with comprehensive radar and superior torpedoes once Mark 14 defects were corrected, sank 1,314 Japanese merchant ships, totaling 5.2 million gross tons, accounting for 56% of Japan's total shipping losses. They also destroyed approximately 200 Japanese warships. In exchange, Japan sank only 22 American submarines throughout the entire Pacific War. Losses caused more by mines, accidents, and operational hazards than by effective Japanese anti-submarine operations. The disparity extended to merchant shipping interdiction. Japanese submarines, despite impressive technical capabilities and favorable geography for commerce rating, sank only 184 merchant ships, totaling approximately 1 million tons during the war. American submarines achieved over 5 times greater destruction. German U-boats, operating in the heavily defended Atlantic, sank 2,840 ships, totaling 14.3 million tons. Japanese submarine forces, with superior boats operating in more favorable conditions, accomplished less than 10% of German results. This failure stemmed directly from Japan's neglect of electronic warfare technologies. While German U-boats received increasingly sophisticated radar detectors, allowing them to evade Allied air patrols by detecting search radar and diving before aircraft close to visual range, Japanese submarines operated blind to electromagnetic threats until far too late. When radar detectors finally reached Japanese boats in 1944, American forces already deployed radar systems operating on frequencies Japanese equipment couldn't detect. The technological gap manifested in every dimension of submarine warfare. American boats carried multiple radar systems: SD or SV for air search, SJ for surface search, ST for periscope-mounted ranging during submerged attacks. They possessed radio direction finding equipment that located Japanese transmissions. They had sophisticated radio communications, allowing coordination between submarines, with surface forces, and with shore commands. They carried advanced torpedoes with magnetic exploders, acoustic seekers, and improved running depth control. Japanese submarines possessed none of these capabilities in meaningful quantities. Their radio equipment remained adequate but unremarkable. They lacked effective radar throughout most of the war. Their sonar emphasized passive listening rather than active tracking. Their doctrine valued stealth over aggressive prosecution of contacts, creating tactical conservatism that American technology exploited ruthlessly. Perhaps most damning, Japanese naval leadership never recognized how completely American electronic warfare capabilities had obsoleted their submarine doctrine. Even as losses mounted catastrophically, senior officers attributed defeats to American numerical superiority, crew deficiencies, or tactical errors rather than fundamental technological inferiority. Research into radar and sonar continued at low priority, with available systems going first to combined fleet capital ships rather than submarines desperately needing electronic self-defense. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, one of few successful Japanese submarine commanders to survive the war, later wrote that discovering American radar and sonar capabilities after Japan's surrender felt like learning his forces had fought blindfolded while enemies possessed perfect vision. The metaphor captured essential truth. Japanese submariners operated in darkness, detecting targets through periscopes and hydrophones, unaware when enemies had them located and tracked through invisible electromagnetic and acoustic sensors. The final months of war saw Japanese submarine operations reduced to desperate missions, supplying isolated garrisons. These supply runs, executed by submarines surfacing near beaches to unload food and ammunition for bypassed troops, represented complete abandonment of offensive submarine doctrine. Boats designed to attack enemy warships and interdict commerce instead transported rice and medicine to doomed soldiers, while American forces ignored them as strategically irrelevant. When submarines attempted offensive operations in late war period, American anti-submarine forces destroyed them with mechanical efficiency. Between May and June 1944, of approximately 25 deployed Japanese submarines, American and Allied forces sank 17. The entire 7th Submarine Squadron. Picket line fell to USS England and her consorts in 12 days. Individual Japanese submarines occasionally achieved tactical successes, sinking isolated ships or evading detection through exceptional seamanship. But strategic impact remained negligible. Post-war analysis by American and British naval intelligence revealed how thoroughly Japanese submarine forces had been defeated, not through superior numbers, but through technological advantage. The reports noted that Japanese submarines possessed excellent torpedoes, adequate hull designs, and capable crews. What they lacked was the electronic warfare capabilities that made modern submarine operations viable against prepared defenses. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, observed in post-war writings that American submarine success depended critically on radar that allowed night surface operations, good torpedoes once Mark 14 defects were corrected, and intelligence from code breaking that revealed Japanese convoy routes. Remove any of these three factors, particularly radar, and American submarine effectiveness would have declined drastically. Japanese submarines lacked all three advantages. Their torpedoes worked magnificently, but doctrine and targeting deficiencies meant they rarely fired at optimal targets. Their intelligence about American shipping remained poor throughout the war. Most critically, their complete absence of effective radar meant they couldn't replicate American tactics that relied on electronic detection for targeting and situational awareness. The lesson transcended simple technological comparison. American submarine doctrine evolved around available technology, integrating radar, sonar, fire control computers, and radio communications into coordinated operational systems. Japanese doctrine remained frozen in pre-radar concepts, assuming submarines would rely on visual detection, close-range torpedo attacks, and individual initiative rather than coordinated operations. Even when Japanese engineers developed radar and sonar systems comparable to American equipment, which they eventually achieved in some respects, the psychological and doctrinal damage had already occurred. Submarine crews who experienced American electronic warfare superiority became cautious. Conservative operators who avoided risks and prioritized survival over aggressive attacks. This timidity, entirely rational given the technological environment, meant that even improved equipment couldn't restore offensive effectiveness. The story of Japanese submarine losses to American radar and sonar represents more than simple technological defeat. It demonstrates how revolutionary capabilities in detection and tracking can render existing operational concepts obsolete overnight. Japanese submarines, designed when visual detection and mechanical reliability defined submarine warfare, found themselves operating in an electromagnetic battlefield where they were effectively blind and deaf while enemies possessed omniscient awareness. For the submariners who experienced this transformation, the reality proved terrifying beyond measure. They couldn't see the radar painting their positions. They couldn't hear the sonar pulses revealing their every maneuver. They couldn't detect the acoustic homing torpedoes tracking their propeller noise. They simply disappeared into dark water, knowing only that somehow, impossibly, American forces always knew where Japanese submarines operated and struck with devastating precision. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Nakajima, interrogated after his capture from RO-50 in February 1945, tried to explain to American intelligence officers the psychological impact of fighting an enemy that seemed to possess supernatural awareness. He described watching American destroyer escorts converge on his position from impossible distances, maintaining pursuit through radical evasion attempts, attacking with weapons that struck from unexpected directions. The Americans, he said, fought as though they possessed some technology that read Japanese minds and predicted Japanese movements. The Americans did possess such technology. It was called radar and sonar, integrated with communications, intelligence, and precision weapons into a system so completely dominant that Japanese submarine operations became exercises in futility and death. No amount of courage, skill, or determination could overcome the fundamental fact that Japanese submarines operated blind while American forces possessed electronic vision. This technological disparity defined submarine warfare in the Pacific. While German U-boats fought increasingly desperate battles against improving Allied anti-submarine capabilities, achieving tactical successes even as strategic defeat loomed, Japanese submarines never achieved comparable results, despite starting the war with better boats, better torpedoes, and frequently better positioned for commerce raiding. The difference lay in electronics, in the invisible electromagnetic and acoustic warfare where American superiority proved absolute. By August 1945, Japan's submarine force existed primarily on paper. Of submarines still afloat, most lacked fuel for operations, experienced crews had perished, and technological obsolescence rendered meaningful operations impossible. The few boats attempting combat missions during war's final months achieved nothing while losing additional crews to American anti-submarine forces that had perfected their deadly craft. The final indignity came after surrender, when Japanese submarine officers examined captured American radar and sonar equipment, studied American tactical doctrines, and realized how completely they had been outmatched. The technology wasn't incomprehensible or impossible. It was simply better, more thoroughly integrated, and deployed with doctrine that exploited its capabilities fully. Japanese engineers could have built equivalent systems. Japanese tacticians could have developed appropriate doctrine. But by the time Japanese leadership recognized the necessity, American technological advantage had become insurmountable. Today, naval historians studying Pacific submarine warfare identify American electronic warfare capabilities as decisive factor in the campaign's outcome. The submarines themselves, impressive as American Gato and Balao-class boats were, couldn't have achieved their devastating effectiveness without radar for target detection, sonar for precise targeting, radio for coordinated operations, and intelligence from code breaking that revealed enemy movements. Japanese submarines, magnificent boats in many respects, couldn't overcome the electronic battlefield blindness that left them vulnerable to enemies they couldn't detect until moments before destruction. The crews who died aboard I-52, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, and 128 other lost submarines weren't defeated by superior seamanship or better tactics. They were defeated by technology they didn't possess, couldn't acquire fast enough, and never fully understood until too late. The radar sonar net that American forces wove across the Pacific transformed the ocean from a hiding place into a transparent killing ground where Japanese submarines had nowhere to hide and no way to fight back effectively. It stands as one of history's clearest demonstrations that in modern warfare, technological superiority in detection and tracking can prove more decisive than any advantage in platforms, weapons, or warrior spirit. If you found this deep dive into naval technology fascinating, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Drop a comment below telling us which WWIIHistory technology gap you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.